She had 47 minutes to find a husband, not a real one. She had stopped believing in real ones 3 years ago, when the last one turned out to be Harlan Voss's investment, and she had signed the dissolution papers herself, very calmly, at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday, and gone directly to work. Tonight she needed something functional, a warm body in a dinner jacket, who could stand beside her for 4 hours in her grandfather's estate and let the right people see a ring on her left hand and not embarrass himself with the board members, who were watching. What she needed was a stranger who was good at pretending. She did not know that the man she was about to ask, the one in the workshop at the end of Calloway Lane, with sawdust on his forearms and a 7-year-old daughter asleep upstairs, and a file folder in his bottom drawer that he had not opened in 2 years, was the man who had written the clause she was trying to survive tonight. She was standing at the window of the Millbrook Inn, with her phone in one hand and the trust document in the other, looking at the parking lot and trying to find a solution that did not exist. He was 38 miles away, fitting a drawer back into a shaker cabinet with a mallet and a patience that came from having already lost the thing he could not afford to lose. And somewhere between them, the evening was already in motion. Nate Calloway's workshop occupied the ground floor of a converted carriage house behind the property on Calloway Lane, which had been in his family for 2 generations, and which had a $210,000 note coming due in 63 days. The note was not a surprise. He had taken it on knowingly, 3 years ago, when he left the firm and needed something to do with his hands that was not practice law. And he had been making the payments on it since, which meant the workshop had to generate $3,700 a month in revenue, which it did, barely, most months, and did not, occasionally. And this was one of the occasionally months. Along the north wall of the workshop, a Chippendale breakfront waiting for its new veneer, commissioned by an estate lawyer in Burlington, who had a client with more square footage than taste and a budget that made up for it. On the center work table, opened flat, a set of original shaker cabinet drawings from 1882, on loan from a Hancock Shaker Village collection, because the client in question had asked for a reproduction that was indistinguishable from the original, and Nate had said yes, and had meant it, and the drawings were there to prove he had. Against the south wall, hanging on a series of brass hooks his father had installed in 1987, 22 hand tools, each one in the same position it had occupied for 30 years. Each one either his father's or his father's father's, with the exception of the Japanese pull saw he had ordered in 2019, which had earned its place. He was 40 years old. He had a daughter named Wren, who was 7, and who had her mother's precision and her grandfather's stubbornness, and a brass compass she had been carrying since she was 4. The compass had been her mother's. Catherine Calloway had used it on every landscape survey she ever walked, a habit she had learned from the landscape architect who trained her. And she had told Wren once that a compass always points home, which meant that home was not a fixed address but a direction. And Wren had understood this the way she understood most things her mother told her. Completely, immediately, and without needing it explained twice. Catherine had died in the 3rd year of their marriage. Wren had been 2. Nate had been a family law and estate attorney for 11 years. He had written a great many trusts and wills and inheritance instruments in that time, some of them for clients he admired, and some for clients he understood, and some for clients he found entirely legible and still worked for, because the work was important regardless. He had left the practice 31 months ago. He did not talk about why. The file folder in his bottom drawer was labeled Beaumont Trust, Final Executed. It had been there since he put it there. He had not looked at it since he put it there, because looking at it would mean touching the year it came from, and the year it came from was not a year he was ready to touch. He was in the middle of fitting the shaker drawer, mallet in his right hand. The drawer positioned at the exact angle that would let the dovetails seat without forcing, when his phone rang. He looked at it, unknown number. He almost let it go. Then he looked at Ren's monitor. She was asleep, fully asleep, the way children sleep when they have had a complete day, and he picked up. She said, "I know this is an unusual request." He said, "Most unusual requests start that way." She said, "I need a man to accompany me to a formal event tonight. For 4 hours. I need him to wear a dinner jacket and stand beside me and not embarrass me and be gone by midnight. I will pay $5,000. He said, "How did you get this number?" She said, "Margaret Holt." She said you were the only person she trusted for something like this. Margaret Holt was his neighbor. She was 74 and ran the church rummage sale and had opinions about everyone in the county and was apparently running a second, quieter operation that he had not known about. He said, "What kind of event?" She said, "A private gala. Millbrook Estate. The Beaumont family." He put the mallet down. He said, "I know who the Beaumont family is." She said, "Most people do." He said, "That's not what I meant." She heard something in that. She would tell him later that she heard it, the particular weight of the words, but she did not ask about it yet. She said, "I need someone there by 8. It's 7:14. Do you have a dinner jacket?" He looked at the drawer. He looked at the compass that was sitting on his workbench because Ren had left it there that morning when she came to find him for breakfast. He picked it up and turned it in his hand and set it down so it was pointing at the north wall. He said, "I have a dinner jacket." She said, "I'm Simone Beaumont." He said, "I know." She said, "Then you know what tonight is." He did not answer that directly. He said, "I'll be there at 7:55. He called his neighbor Margaret, who said she would be over in 10 minutes, not to worry, and arrived in 8. He kissed Ren's forehead without waking her, and stood in the doorway of her room for a moment, looking at the compass on her nightstand where she had put it before bed. And then he got his dinner jacket from the back of the closet and walked out to the truck. He drove 38 miles through a Vermont October evening, and the fields were the color of something about to end, and he drove with the window cracked an inch, because the cold air helped him think, and he was thinking about a trust document he had written 3 years ago for a man who had told him, very clearly, what he intended and why, and about what had happened to that intention in the 31 months since. He did not pretend, on the drive, that this was a coincidence. Simone Beaumont had built the Beaumont Group's current portfolio in 9 years, expanding her grandfather's regional hotel chain into a $2.1 billion hospitality and real estate operation with 16 properties across 7 states. She had done this by making decisions that other people said were reckless, and then watching them resolve into the only logical outcome, and by working the kind of hours that people praise in retrospect and worry about in real time, and by never once allowing the board to see her uncertain, because uncertainty in a woman running a company worth $2 billion was categorized as something other than what it was. Her grandfather, Henri Beaumont, had died 14 months ago. He was 81, and he had been ready, and he had held her hand on the last day and told her that the company was hers, and had always been hers, and he was sorry for the clause. And she had said what clause? And he had said the one Voss pushed through in the codicil. And then he had been gone, before she could ask him what he meant. The clause was in Section 7C of the Trust Codicil, filed March 2021. It said that the primary trust distribution, $180 million, the controlling stake in the Beaumont Group, transferred to Simone Beaumont on her 38th birthday, contingent on her marital status. Married, It transferred fully and without restriction. Unmarried, it dissolved into a discretionary board distribution. The board, at present, had 5 members. Harlan Voss controlled 3 of them. Her 38th birthday was today. The gala tonight was her grandfather's annual estate dinner, a tradition since 1987, attended by the board members and the family's oldest allies. Appearances at the gala constituted the formal record. If she arrived alone tonight, Harlan Voss's attorneys had already indicated they would move on the distribution first thing in the morning. The thing Simone's money could not fix, and her position could not reach, was the particular quality of a room that her grandfather used to be in. She had 300 people who worked for her, and 400 contacts who returned her calls, and 0 people who talked to her the way Henri Beaumont had talked to her, like she was already exactly who she was going to be, and that was sufficient. She had not been in a room with that quality of attention since 14 months ago. She had stopped expecting it. She was not sure she remembered what it felt like to be seen without also being assessed. She was standing at the window of the Millbrook Inn with the trust document in her hand when the truck pulled into the parking lot. It was an older model, dark green, with a toolbox mounted in the bed. She watched the man who got out of it adjust his dinner jacket, which fit him well, not expensively, and look up at the inn for a moment. He had sawdust on the back of his right hand that he hadn't noticed. He was looking at the building the way a person looks at a place they have thought about before. She met him in the lobby. He was taller than she expected. He looked around the lobby once, the way you look at a room you are assessing rather than entering. And then he looked at her and said, "The clause is contingent on attendance at the annual estate gala as a married couple. Not on a marriage certificate on file." "Attendance," she said. "How do you know the specific language?" He said, "I read estate documents." She said, "Most people don't read estate documents." He said no. She looked at him. He looked at her. She was aware, in the way you become aware of something that has been true for longer than you realized, that he had not answered her question. She said, "You have sawdust on your hand." He looked at his hand. He produced a handkerchief from his jacket pocket, actual linen, monogrammed, slightly worn at the fold, and wiped it off. He offered her his arm. She took it because they were already late. The Millbrook Estate Gala occupied the main hall and the eastern terrace of the Beaumont property, and Simone had attended every year since she was 9 years old and knew the geometry of the room by feel. Who stood where? Who faced which direction? Which conversations were audible from the garden door? Which ones required the northeast corner to stay private? She moved through it with Nate on her arm, and what she noticed first was that he moved the same way. Not the same ease, different ease. The ease of a man who had been in rooms like this and knew what they were. He was introduced 3 times in the first 20 minutes. He introduced himself as Nate to all 3 and gave no last name and no profession. And he answered the questions he was asked with the precise minimum of words that constitutes a complete answer, and he asked one question in return each time. One specific question that made the person answering it feel that their answer was the only interesting thing in the room, and Simone watched all 3 of these interactions and thought, he has done this before. The board members were present. Harlan Voss arrived at 8:47. He was 66 years old, and he entered mid-sentence, the way he always did, as though the room had been waiting for his arrival to begin a conversation that was already underway. He picked up a candle holder from the side table near the entry. A silver piece, part of her grandmother's collection, turned it once in his hand and set it back down 3 inches from where it had been. He did this without looking at it. He was already looking at Simone. "Simone," he said, arriving beside her with the momentum of a man who had already decided the outcome. He looked at Nate. His eyes moved over Nate. The way you look at furniture you are deciding is not valuable. I don't believe I know your guest. Nate said, Nate. Harlan said, and what do you do, Nate? I restore things, Nate said. Restore. Harlan smiled with the portion of his face that smiles do not reach. How modest. He picked up Simone's champagne glass from the table beside her, just lifted it, without asking, and looked at the level, and set it back down slightly closer to the edge. I had been told Simone would be attending alone this evening. Old information, apparently. Nate looked at the champagne glass. He looked at the candle holder. He looked at Harlan. He said, very quietly, the Cayman account is registered as SH471. Harlan went still. The wire transfer dated March 14, 2021, was $340,000, Nate said. It came from a shell company controlled by your family office. It went to a notary named Gilbert Price, who filed the codicil amendment 14 days after the transfer. The Sex Estate Fraud Division has a standing interest in notarial bribery patterns in trust instruments. He paused. The original trust document, the one Henri Beaumont signed in my presence in November 2020, contained no marriage clause. Henri Beaumont never authorized a marriage clause. What he told me, specifically, was that Simone had already proven herself, and he would not attach conditions to what she had already earned. Harlan's hand was still on the champagne glass. He had not moved it. I have the November 2020 execution copy, Nate said. I have the meeting notes. I have my signature as drafting attorney on the original. If you move on the distribution tomorrow morning, those documents will be filed with the court before your attorneys finish breakfast. His voice had not risen, had not changed register. He had delivered each sentence the way a craftsman sets a joint, without force, because the precision makes force unnecessary. He returned his attention to the room. Harlan let go of the champagne glass. He straightened slightly. He looked at Simone, and whatever he intended to say did not arrive. He looked at Nate once more, the way a person looks at something they expected to be furniture and have discovered is structural. He picked up the candle holder from the side table, right first, then left, the automatic habit, and stopped. He set it back down where it had been. Exactly where it had been. He did not threaten. He did not compose himself first. He walked toward the exit the way pressure leaves when someone opens a valve, not dramatically, not with sound, just a steady, irreversible loss of everything he had been holding. The last thing he did in that room was stop at the door. He did not look back. The door opened, and he was gone, and the candle holder was in the right place, and the champagne glass was where it belonged, and the room felt, for a moment, measurably cleaner. Simone could not speak for the length of a full internal breath, and then another. She said, "You wrote the trust." He said, "Yes." She said, "You were Henri's attorney." He said, "Yes." She said, "Why didn't you?" and stopped, because she already knew part of the answer, and was asking because she needed to hear the part she didn't know. He said, "Come with me. I want to show you something." She followed him through the hall, and out the garden door, and down the stone path she had walked 1,000 times, past the boxwoods her grandfather had planted in 1994, toward the back of the property where the rose garden sat behind its low stone wall. The roses were finished for October, cut back to stubs, the beds mulched, the whole enclosure carrying the particular dignity of things that have been tended through their ending. She had not been back here since her grandfather's funeral. He stopped at the wall, and she stood beside him, and neither of them sat down. He said, "My wife was Catherine Calloway. She was a landscape architect." Your grandfather hired her in 2017 to redesign this garden. Simone said, I remember the redesign. She worked on it for 2 years, he said. She and your grandfather spent a lot of time back here. He told her things he didn't tell other people. She told me some of them. He looked at the rose beds. She died in February 2021. Aneurysm. Ren was 2 years old. He said this the way he said everything. Flat, declarative, the facts doing all the work. I had been Henri's attorney since 2018, he said. I drafted the original trust in November 2020. No marriage clause. Henri's exact instruction was, she has already proven herself. I will not attach conditions. I wrote that as a note in the file, word for word, because I thought someday it might matter. He paused. In January 2021, Henri called me. He said Voss had proposed a codicil, and he was considering it. I told him not to sign anything until I reviewed it. He said he would wait. Simone said he didn't wait. He signed a codicil in March 2021. I didn't review it, because by March 2021, I had resigned from the firm. Catherine had died 5 weeks earlier, and I wasn't able to. He stopped. Tried again. I left the file with the partner taking over my cases. I did not know what the codicil said until 14 months ago, when Henri died, and I read his obituary and remembered the trust and pulled the executed copy. She said, and then? I spent 7 months tracing the notary. Gilbert Price. He had filed 2 other codicil amendments that year under similar circumstances. Different trusts, different clients. The same pattern of a wire transfer preceding the filing by 10 to 18 days. I found the SH-4471 account in March of this year. It took another 4 months to connect it conclusively to Voss's family office. She said, you had it this whole time. He said, I had it for 4 months. I needed the right moment to use it. If I filed it without the gala record, Voss's attorneys could have argued the distribution had already triggered. The clause requires the gala attendance as the formal occasion of record. I needed tonight. She said, you needed me to be here. With a husband. He said, I needed you to be here. The husband was your solution. I would have found another way to be in this room. She looked at the rose garden. She thought about her grandfather walking this path with a woman named Catherine Calloway for 2 years, talking about things he didn't tell other people. She thought about the note in a file, she has already proven herself, I will not attach conditions. She thought about the man beside her driving 38 miles in a dinner jacket, knowing the whole time what he knew. She said, you never pretended. He said, no. She said, not once tonight. He said, no. She said nothing more, and neither did he. And the rose garden held them in the particular quiet of a place that has been tended through hard things and is still standing. She had been looking for a performance. He had been here the whole time, being completely real. The estate attorney filed the motion on October 22nd. Harlan Voss's legal team had 48 hours to respond. They responded by requesting an emergency stay, which was denied. The November 3rd hearing lasted 6 hours. The original November 2020 trust document was entered into evidence. Nate's meeting notes, dated November 14th, 2020, Henri Beaumont's signature at the bottom, were entered into evidence. The executed copy of the codicil, with Gilbert Price's notarial stamp and the wire transfer record from Cayman account SH-4471, dated 14 days before the filing, was entered into evidence. Gilbert Price had already cooperated with the SEC inquiry in exchange for a reduced finding. His statement was 11 pages. Harlan Voss's attorneys had already seen it. Harlan Voss sat at the respondent's table on November 3rd and was very quiet. Not the quiet before a storm. The other kind. He did not pick up anything from the table. Not his pen, not his water glass, not the folder his attorney pushed toward him. His hands sat flat and still and ordinary in front of him, belonging to a man who had run out of things to handle. He read the statement aloud when the judge required it. His voice held the shape of his voice without the force that had always lived inside it. The board met on November 5th. The Harlan Voss-controlled members had already received the SEC's preliminary findings, which had arrived that morning, which had not arrived accidentally. The vote on the trust distribution was 4-1. The $180 million transferred to Simone Beaumont's trust without condition or restriction. She was in her office when the confirmation came through. She read it once. She set it down. She stood at the window for a moment, the Burlington window, 14th floor, the lake visible in the distance, and she breathed. Then she called Nate. He was in the workshop. She could hear the sound of something being sanded in the background, a long, steady rhythm that stopped when he picked up. She said, "It's done." He said, "I know. My attorney called this morning." She said, "You had an attorney on this." He said, "You didn't think I walked in there without a filing ready." She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Ren. Is she?" He said, "She's good. She's at school." A pause. "She asked about you this morning." Simone said, "She doesn't know me. She knows I went to a gala," he said. "She wanted to know about the lady I went with. I said she was someone Henri Beaumont cared about. She said that was a good enough reason." Another pause, shorter. "She said to tell you the compass is good in October." Simone did not say anything for a moment. She said, "I don't know what that means." He said, "She'll explain it to you." 8 months later. Ren Calloway was 8 years old and had decided that the compass needed a proper case, and had made one from a scrap of walnut from her father's workshop, sanded smooth and fitted with a piece of chamois on the inside, and had presented it to Vivienne. She called Simone by a name she had chosen herself in February, which was not Simone, which Simone had not corrected. On the occasion of Ren's birthday in June, because Ren felt that birthday presents were best given rather than received, which was something her father had told her, and she had decided was correct. The compass sat in its walnut case on the kitchen table of the house in Calloway Lane, which had been repainted in April. The trim, specifically, which had needed it for 2 years. The $210,000 note was paid in March. There was a new contract on the north wall of the workshop. The Beaumont Group's Burlington property needed its original lobby millwork restored. A 2-year commission, the largest Nate had taken, negotiated without sentiment and without discount. The craftsmanship was the point. The invoice was the invoice. Ren was explaining the compass to a woman sitting beside her at the kitchen table, and the woman was listening with the full quality of her attention, which was the kind of attention that does not plan its next sentence while the other person is still speaking. Nate was across the table, drinking coffee. He was watching the two of them. What was on his face was not something he would ever name or perform. It was just there, the way structural things are there, not announced, not displayed, simply holding. Ren said, "It always points home." "That's what Mom told me. Home isn't where you live. It's which direction is true." The woman beside her said, "Which direction is true?" Ren looked at her compass. She looked at the man across the table. She looked back at the woman. "That one," she said, and pointed. His hand was near hers on the table. Neither had moved it away. Outside, June was doing what June does in Vermont when it finally arrives. Unhurried, certain, the air carrying the particular warmth of something that has been earned by everything that came before it. Some things cannot be performed. The ones that are real announce themselves exactly the way he did, by simply being what they are, consistently, even when no one asked them to be, even when a performance would have been so much easier. The ones worth keeping are always the ones that never pretended once. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the real thing doesn't look for applause. Subscribe for more stories that trust quiet people. And tell us in the comments, Simone hired a stranger to stand beside her and protect something she was about to lose, and he had been carrying the document that could save it for 4 months without telling her. If someone had that kind of protection in their pocket and never said a word, would you feel rescued, or would you feel managed? We read every one,